if a person's very anxious or having panic attacks, where you've got anxiety disease, if you're depressed, you've got something wrong with your hormones. If you're anxious, you've got they'll talk about genetic issues, or they'll talk about brain chemicals, or they'll talk about your brain's doing it. Your brain's not doing it. Your brain's responding to what's happening in your life. Because if you think your brain is doing it and your body is doing it, then how do you manage it? What do you do? What part can I play in my own healing? And then it becomes easy to focus, okay, well, I can do diets, I can do exercise. That's logical. And then am I managing my mind? Well, I'm using my mind to make the decision to do the exercise and the diet. So yes, you're using your mind in a good way there, but you've also got to manage that anger that you have towards someone in that meeting who drives you crazy. Those moments can catch us. And if those are the moments that, if they're not managed, become 99% chaos, because it's a mind thing.
In your work, when you are looking at research surrounding the changes that go on in women's brains as they are navigating this perimenopause to menopause transition, as a neuroscientist, what are some of the common ways that the changes in sex hormones will show up in terms of brain functioning? What are some of the common things that you think women are dealing with that are directly attributable to these shifts in sex hormones?
I think one of the first parts to that answer is to really understand that it's the brain and the body. And so you mentioned the hormone system. So we're all under the impression. I was talking to someone. Actually, let me jump to this question. I was talking to someone about this very thing yesterday, and they were asking me about Alzheimer's. And the way I'm going to answer your question and talk about using the example of Alzheimer's. So we all are told constantly that Alzheimer's is because you've got neurofibrillary plaques and tangles, which is these little things in your brain that basically will mess up your brain function, and we see memory and so on changing, and that happens sort of over time, and used to hit people in their 80s when I first started practicing, and now people are getting Alzheimer's as young as 35 and 45. And they called early onset Alzheimer's. Okay, so why am I using that as an example to answer your question? Here's the reason. There's more evidence that things like cognitive decline in things like frontal lobe dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., are actually thought disorders. Now, you may not find the word thought disorders, but it's how one is managing. You'll see things like how we manage stress will set you up for Alzheimer's, how we manage that kind of thing. So what's really important is to look at the unique stress that a woman is going through versus a man, and humans. So as all humans, we experience stress. Stress is good for us, except when it becomes toxic. But there's unique things that male and females go through, and all genders go through. So whatever gender you are, you're going to go through different experiences. You talk mainly on this podcast about about women and menopause and perimenopause, so we'll focus in on that. And as you know, the statistics are pretty high that women will suffer from any kind of cognitive dementia, that sort of thing. So when I talk about it being a stress and a thought disorder, stress is good for us, except when it becomes toxic. When does it become toxic? When we don't manage it. When we see it as something, we don't have tools in place to manage it. And then what happens is the mind-brain-body connection gets disrupted. And over time, if we get into patterns of not managing, we are going to then set up our brain and our body for breakdown. And that breakdown will manifest in different ways in different people. The reason that we are seeing it in so much earlier now is because of the whole way that mental health has been managed. It's moved from something that is based on people's extremely complex narratives and lives and their responses to life and how they're managing life, to a type of medical disease. So like if someone has cardiovascular disease or they have diabetes, they'll diagnose, and a diagnosis is implicit in a diagnosis is that there's some underlying biological cause, as an RN. I'm just giving you, you already know this, but the word diagnosis implies there's an underlying biological cause. We're going to do tests, we're going to find that underlying biological cause, and we're going to target some kind of treatment, whether it's medical or whatever, to that underlying cause. Now, that definitely does work when it comes to the physical body, and we're getting more and more advanced, as we know, with that approach. But it doesn't work with mental health. Yet that is the approach that has been used with mental health. And so when people in early parenthood, like a new mom, or a person who's a young woman who's gone into university, and then a young woman who then starts working and gets into a relationship, becomes a mother, and the those are major, major changes that are very, very stressful. And if they don't have coping skills, right, from entering university, entering parenthood, entering relationships, all that kind of thing, which we don't really do very well. We don't really guide. There's just all these expectations that women must just, do it all. And there's all the sort of patriarchal kind of philosophies as well that are putting women under pressure. I've got to be able to do the motherhood thing perfectly and work perfectly. And so I'm painting a picture here of stress that is something that unmanaged can start becoming toxic quite early on. And that sets us up for the declines that we see. And then if you add then the hormonal changes, and you teach so much on nutrition, your brain and body are 1% of who you are, but you've still got to look after them. And so if you're not managing your mind, which is the 99%, and no one's helping you manage your mind, and you're just like going through life, and on top of it, you are not managing your nutrition, your exercise, etc., in a bio individual way that you help people to understand, that is just a calamity waiting to happen. And so therefore, as perimenopause and menopause hits with those major changes, instead of it being a nice, not always nice, but a transition that is actually normal, the stresses of life and the environment and diet and all these things that have been mismanaged have all accumulated over the years, and now you're sitting in a perfect storm. And so then perimenopause and menopause become very traumatic, and that's when we see increasing cardiovascular issues and the cognitive dementias, etc., etc. So I believe that the and your question was, what specifically do I see? They complain. It's memory, brain fog, um, overwhelmed, don't like their body anymore, libido's dropped, so that's those very typical sorts of these patterns, and they're very real. But we know that medicine has focused mainly on male research, and there's not enough on female research. So very often things like cardiovascular disease, which are also indications of cardiovascular disease, doesn't just happen, it builds up over years. The symptoms are often missed very often, just hysteria. Still, the hysteria is not used, but it's still there's often over emotional women and that sort of thing. So a lot of that combination, I think, it creates these perfect storms that women go through, and it makes it so much more difficult. So we really do need to target from very, very young. We need to be teaching our young girls, the 5 and 6 year olds, and as they go through all the way through the different stages, we should be talking about how to manage their mind. What does that look like? What managing my mind, managing my brain, managing my body? They shouldn't be coming to you at 50 and needing help, and that's what's happening, or coming to me. I don't practice anymore, but so many people would come to me in their 50s and 60s, and their life's falling apart and their relationships are falling apart, and they've got all these early signs of dementia. And it makes me so sad if you then just hear the story of their life. So that's a long answer, but I think it's a big picture answer, that I and and even if you are in your 60s and 70s, if you're listening to this podcast and you or whatever age you're at, there's always hope. I did some of the first neuroplasticity research back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I showed with directed mind management, you can rewire your brain and your body. And the other piece of good news is that your brain and body work as a unit. Memory is not just in the brain. And that's what we also told. It's incorrect. Your brain only holds a type of memory, a version. Your body holds another version, and your mind holds the main version. So we've got three different versions of memories. So we've got a network. And if we understand that network, we can actually then target the network, and we can do something. So there's always hope to change and improve health, etc., etc.
Well, and I think it's so important to have a message of hope. It's not, if you didn't get the proper training or modeling of behavior growing up, that somehow once you get to middle age, the wheels are going to fall off the bus and suddenly you're not going to be able to get on back on track. That is not what you're saying.
No,
What
not
are
true.
what are some of the important skills that either children or young adults or teenagers should be learning to help kind of manage their not just their emotions, but managing, as you appropriately astutely say, managing your mind? What are the things, the skills that you think are so important to kind of teach or instruct our younger people about so that they can navigate those major life changes, whether it's going to college, new job, getting married, having children, some of the things that happen that are just part of life transitions that we expect, in particular, we expect our young women to do it in a way that it's effortless and easy and everything's perfect. And I think this exterior pressures just make it harder for women to navigate, these major life milestones.
A great question. So there's what I try and help people understand. There's three aspects. Knowledge is really important. We need to understand and educate, because if you just give someone a technique, it's not sustainable. So a big part of what I do is to educate. It's also what you're doing. It's what I did in my practice too, and that's why I do the research, write the books, and do what I do. So education is a massive part. And when I talk about education, it's really understanding what your mind is. So that's the first thing, is to really understand, be educated to understand your mind and the power of your mind and what you can do, the power that's in your hands. What is your real superpower? It's your mind. And so what that is. So that, and I'll give the three main things, and then we can dive in a little bit to each if you'd like. Then the other thing is, what do I do in the moment of crisis, in that moment of reaction? Because if I'm in that moment of reaction, what we see from the research, if you can learn to control that moment, and the moment that we talk about in science that is very significant is the 60-second mark. It's a very unique time frame. I talk about 63, and you'll see why in a moment. But if you can learn to manage that moment and start training yourself to mind manage, which is self regulation, which is absolutely key to preventing things like Alzheimer's and dementias, and catching that brain fog and fixing it up quickly and that sort of thing. Then you can also then see, if I can self-regulate this minute, I can self-regulate the next minute and the next hour and the next day and my relationships, and I can learn the self-regulation process. Then I can also see, it gives me a window into me, and then I can see my patterns that are driving me, which are habits, which are the dysfunctional habits or disruptive habits, which are coming from things I've just made bad choices about, or things that are coming potentially from trauma at any stage of your life. Trauma being the trauma, not the concept creep trauma, where if you can't get a parking spot, it's trauma, not that kind of trauma. Trauma happens to you. So it's to identify those patterns that we have created, that have come out of our life. So there's three aspects. Then is knowledge, understanding the mind, brain, body connection properly, psychoneurobiology, what is the mind, etc. Understanding how to manage the 63 seconds. And then once you've managed the 63 seconds, that level of self-regulation gives you insight into the habits that are driving you. And then and then knowing how to, to recognize each of those, and then knowing how there's formulas that you can apply, and you can use. There's so many great techniques, but if you just slap on a green juice, a bit of exercise, and a bit of meditation, you're band-aiding the wound. You're not solving the problem. So I show you. I can briefly overview how to fit those concepts into the sort of plan of three. So yeah, so that's the big picture. Would you like me to dive into each a little bit more?
I would. And in particular, because I literally just said this morning. I need to have someone come on and talk about self regulation, because people hear that term and they don't fully understand or appreciate what it means. So this is divine intervention that we're having this conversation right now.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, well, that's wonderful. Self-regulation is probably one of the most important things that we can learn, and it's your evidence that you are managing your mind. So let's start with the education bit, and obviously this is I can't teach everything in the next hour, so I'm going to give you the broad overview, and then and I can just, if you okay, I can just reference the books where people can find
Absolutely.
information. Okay, so the first thing is, your mind is not your brain. So I've got a little model of the brain here. For those of you that are listening, I'm just holding up a plastic model of the brain, and you are not your brain. That's the first thing to really understand when it comes to the knowledge component, which is the first arm of this sort of triad, is to understand you're not your brain. And if you think you are your brain, or you think the mind and brain are synonyms of each other, it's totally understandable, because that's the messaging that you're getting 24/7 from every media, medical, psychiatric, psychological outlet. They are terms that are used so incorrectly. The terms, you would have heard words like mind, brain, consciousness, subconscious, unconscious, emotions. I mean, there's just all these psychological terms that get thrown out, and it's very confusing. And if you don't really know, it feels like you know what they are, but if you don't really know what they really are and how they work together, it can mess you. It can be confusing. So you want to be equipped with the correct knowledge. So your mind is not your brain. Your brain is a physical organ, and it doesn't even do what we think it does. It's not the only place where memory is stored. It is only one of the places, as I mentioned earlier on. So your brain is part of your body, It's a system. And every time that you learn something new, like this podcast, you're learning new information, this information is going to be stored in your brain and your body. There are 37 to 100 trillion cells in your brain and your body. And every word I'm saying is basically little memories. And the memories cluster together to form thoughts. So this podcast is a thought basically built of memories, which is a conversation built of details, if that makes sense. So, what you are doing as a human every day is you taking all the experiences, all the conversations, and you are gathering all the little memories and you're building them into a thought. And that you getting the information, listening, thinking, feeling, choosing, that's all mind work. That's not brain work. That's mind work. Your mind does that. So your mind is your, whatever you want to call it, your spirit, your soul, your levels of this different conscious, non-conscious, etc. But your mind is this life force, this energetic force that drives all this sort of psychological stuff. And it's for to get to a physics level, you can literally put your hands in a circle around you, and that's your biofield. And that's not anything weird. It's the same kind of energy in your biofield that runs your cell phone. It's an electromagnetic energy force. And what we see with people that are alive is that they have this field, and that field goes through the person. And everything about you being able to listen to this conversation, go through the experiences of life, first goes into this mind biofield, which is your mind. And it's got different levels, which we'll talk about in a moment. So once it's in your mind processes the information. This is 99% of who you are. This mind thing that's got three different levels drives your psychology and your neurophysiology. So the fact that your brain works, that it has neurohormones and it has networks and neurons and different structures like the amygdala that everyone hears about and the prefrontal cortex that people love to talk about, all those are run by your mind. Your brain can't do anything. It doesn't generate thoughts. It doesn't think. The amygdala doesn't do anything. They just responders. They hosts. So the brain is made of parts, each part structured to host a different function. Like the frontal lobe is designed to host executive type functions. The amygdala is designed to host perceptual experiences, which are like books in a library. And there's scary and happy and sad and all that stuff. So it's perceptions, perceptual emotional experiences. And different parts of the brain are structured to respond. So when I'm thinking deeply, I'm going to have activity across my whole brain in response. But if I'm really getting insightful, I'll see more firing in the front part of the brain. If I'm really getting in tune with my identity and I'm really confident and whatever, I'll see a lot of lighting up in this part of the brain. So it doesn't mean that part of the brain's generating your personality, it's just responding. But at the same time, my body's responding because every cell of my body is working in coherence with the brain. And so the nervous system, as you know, goes through the entire body, and we express ourselves through our nervous system. And the nervous system reaches all the different systems of the body, which are made of organs, which are made of cells, which are made of energy. And essentially, your mind is running all of that. So brain and body are 1% about of who you are, and mind is 99%. Yet we live in a world that focuses predominantly on the 1%. And we should focus on it. I'm not saying don't. I mean, it's really important that we feed our brain, that we don't get addicted to substances, that we do exercise. Because if your brain and body break down, then your mind it can't work through it. So then that creates feedback loops that are damaging and so on. And people end up crashing in different ways. So we have to look after our brain and our body, but not at the expense of our mind. And for the last 50 years, that's what's happened. We have, as we've learned more about the brain and body, we've become more neurocentric, more physicalist, more materialistic. Materialism in the sense of not buying stuff, in the sense of only the physical counts. And so when people talk about wellness, for example, then it's all about, okay, exercise, diet, and stress management. But it's stress management like one of the pillars. It's like sometimes there's a fourth thing they'll say, maybe spiritual development, but they put them on an equal level. It's not like that. It's 99% mind work, and of that is stress, managing stress, getting meditating and all that kind of thing. And then you have a plan for your brain and your body. So that's really important because your mind takes every experience, processes it, builds it into like little energy clouds, and then puts it in the brain. So there's a sequence here. The brain, and then it puts it in the brain. As soon as this energy of the mind hits the brain, there's all kinds of reactions, and little trees are networks are formed. On the dendrites grow on neurons, and they form like little tree-like structures. And as soon as that's happening, and this happens really fast, we're talking like 400 billion actions per second and faster, because everything is going in this way: mind, brain, body. And in the body, we don't build trees in the body, we build little tiny hedges in the cells. And I'm not going to go into all the technical elements of that, but essentially just think of this network of these clouds of energy in our mind, which are thoughts holding the details, the thoughts with the memories, and then copies are made. A tree, that copy is put in the brain, a little tree grows, copies are put into the cells of the body, and little hedges grow, and there's a connection between all of those, and that's a network. It's an internal world wide web, and you build that. Now, it's also very organic, it's dynamic, it's alive, it's moving, and that energy of the mind doing that is also the same energy that makes your heart beat, that makes your brain respond in this way, that makes your hormones work, that makes your every system of your body, your lungs, breathing. If you're dead, none of that's happening. Within 10 seconds of dying, of your heart stopping, your brain flatlines and everything starts to disintegrate. So when that life force, mind, is removed, everything stops functioning. So mind drives psychology and neurophysiology. So that's called psychoneurobiology, mind brain body connection. And the psycho part, the mind part, is the part that is the most neglected. And that's the part that should not be the most neglected, because if you make the 1% 100% and the 99 1%, we've distorted, and that's kind of been the model. So the biomedical model does the whole diagnosis thing, and if a person's very anxious or having panic attacks, where you've got anxiety disease, you've got, if you're depressed, you've got something wrong with your hormones. You've got, if you're anxious, you've got some. There's the different pillars. They'll talk about genetic issues, or they'll talk about brain chemicals, or they'll talk about your brain's doing it. Your brain's not doing it. Your brain's responding to what's happening in your life. So it's a shift in language, but that shift in language gives you power. Because if you think your brain is doing it and your body is doing it, then how do you manage it? What do you do? What part can I play in my own healing? And then it becomes easy to focus. Okay, well, I can do diets, I can do exercise. That's logical. But and then, am I managing my mind? Well, I'm using my mind to make the decision to do the exercise and the diet. So yes, you're using your mind in a good way there, but you've also got to manage that anger that you have towards someone in that meeting who drives you crazy, or that regret cycle that you're living in, where you keep saying, if only, could have, should have, would have, every time something happens, or that reactive moment where someone says something and just triggers you and you want to punch them in the face or snap at them, or that those moments where you just feel yourself people pleasing again, or where everything seems so black and white, where nothing's black and white. Those moments can catch us. And if those are the moments that, if they're not managed, become 99% chaos, because it's a mind thing. It's in your mind first. Everything's first in your mind. So every reaction you feel, every emotion you feel, everything you are experiencing as a human is first in your mind, then in your brain and your body. They work as a unit. So you will feel the mind in the body, which is all the somatic work that's so popular now, and meditation and so on. And it's important because your body does have a preconscious level. The mind is in the brain and the body. So your mind's in your body. So of course your body feels it. That's why when you have this gut reaction, or this, like you feel like someone's punched you in the gut, or you feel your face flushing, or you feel your heartbeat increasing, your body just does what the mind tells it to do. So if the mind's feeling chaotic, the body will respond. And then these networks that I described, they form and they lodge in the brain and the body. So if I have a toxic, chaotic thought that I don't manage, it's also going to be a toxic tree in my brain. It's also going to be toxic elements in my cell, little hedges. And if I don't manage that, it gets bigger over time. So now we have one thing happening, one network, then another thing in life, and then another thing. And in between, mostly, thank God, otherwise we wouldn't survive, most of those networks are healthy. Most of those networks are the mundane things of the day-to-day life, the joys of life, the ups and downs, the good, the bad, it's sort of the good and the wonderful. The bad and the ugly are fortunately minimal. In some people's lives, they are, who've been through very abusive lives and so on. So in other words, what I'm saying is we're a mixture of all of those, and they feel like they dominate because we live through our nervous system, we live through our body. And if we just think this is everything, how I'm feeling in this moment and how I'm speaking in this moment, if I feel that that's all I have, it feels so hopeless. I feel like I can't control this. But if we stand back and say, okay, my brain and body are just responding to something. What are they responding to? My mind. What part of my mind are they responding to? They're responding to the conscious mind. The conscious mind is awake when you're awake. It can only do one thing at a time, which is hold one conversation at a time. I mean, just try and have two conversations at once. It's impossible. So the conscious mind focus is designed to focus on now and what's coming in now, data that's coming in now, and whatever that stimulates coming up from the non-conscious, and it focuses on the incoming through the eyes of our existing experiences, our existing networks, and it thinks, feels, and chooses and responds. And so it gathers data and it responds based either and that response, which is a react, well, it either reacts or responds. If it responds, you then are listening to the wisdom of another part of your mind, which is called the non-conscious, where the conscious only is awake when you're awake. The non-conscious is awake 24/7. It never stops. It's always going. It's always active. It's brilliant. It's where your intuition, your insight, your wisdom, it's on your side. It's finding all those toxic areas that are disruptive and putting them in, making you aware of those through the subconscious, which is like a little holding area between the two. The non-conscious is really fast, so it has to catch those things, slow them down, put them in the subconscious, make the conscious aware. So when something comes in from outside and we process it, immediately all three levels of our mind are aware, but our conscious mind is always slower than the non-conscious mind. So everything comes in, it's already in us. By the time we're aware of what we are hearing, it's already in us. It's already, copies have been made and it's already in us, a mind, brain, and body. But then when we consciously aware, we can say, okay, wow, this is making me angry. And the network that is already built in the mind, brain, body, you can immediately adjust that. So in the 63-second moment, someone says something to you in a meeting, it's made you mad. They say something, and this maybe happens repeatedly. It's someone at work who just constantly is just negative or whatever. They work you up in a meeting. So now you're in another meeting with that person and the trigger happens and you want to react. So that meeting, the stuff went in your mind, all of it's gone in, your non-conscious has absorbed everything, and it filters through sections of that and puts it into your subconscious, into your conscious mind. Now you're aware, and your conscious mind is saying, okay, this person's saying this now. They said that yesterday and last week, and so all those networks are activated, and everything's now. And this is a little bit chaotic and a little bit messy, and that's normal because everything that's happening day to day and moment to moment is kind of messy. We like little science experiments dealing with stuff, kind of like a toddler. Think of a toddler; they're excited, they're happy, they're learning, and then think of a parent needs to guide a toddler, or there'll be an issue. So here, the angry person, that stuff's come in, it's triggered memories. Now, we can either stay in our toddler portion of our conscious mind and get chaotic and just react and argue back and it just gets worse, or we can think of a parent guiding a toddler and we can stand back and say, okay, they've said it again. I can react. I can feel the response in my body because it's already in my network, but I can change what that looks like. I can't change what they've said. I can't change how they feel because I can't control anyone else, but I can change my response. So if they feel like that, I honor the fact that it's making me feel frustrated, angry, tired of this happening, etc., etc. I can so you go through this little process of honoring how you're feeling, but you shift your mind to say to help yourself understand that this is them, not me. If I respond, I wire toxicity into me. I'm not going to have wisdom. I'm going to bypass the parent. The parent is how I access the non-conscious. I'm not going to have wisdom. The non-conscious has got all the tools that we need to survive and deal with this person who's made us angry or whatever we need in life. Everything's there, but I have to get access to it. And if I stay angry in that 63-second moment, and there's a lot of significance around that 60 seconds scientifically, then I'm going to reinforce the toxic network and I'm going to be very reactive. Or I can stand back and do this little thing. So this book, which comes to the second part of what we can do to help ourselves, is help. It's called Help in a Hurry. It's coming out on the 5th of August, and it's filled with the 18 areas that we found people really battle with in the moment. And we found that, and from our research clinically and so on, is that if we can manage that moment, create the pause, create the gap. We all hear about people create the pause, create the gap. Think of a traffic light, red and orange before it goes green. Before we jump into green, can we get into the red and orange zone? Can we create the gap? in that gap, what we're doing is the toddler then listens to the parent. Okay, I'm not going to stand up in my high chair and fall off the back and crack my head open. I'm going to sit down. Stupid example, but it came to mind because I have a granddaughter who's 20 months, and she did exactly that when we were talking to her yesterday on the phone. She stood up in her chair, nearly fell over, and her mom had to step in. So, a simple example, but I can stand back in that moment, in that 63 seconds, and I can get wisdom from the parent. And then parents read books and they get all kinds of advice to be good parents. That's an example of, as soon as I'm listening to my parents, as soon as I stand back, honor, acknowledge, I then tap into my wisdom of my non-conscious, which you could see as your spiritual level, your wise level. It's connected to the ultimate source of wisdom, which could be God, universe, whatever you source, whatever you call it. We connected beings. We have this in us. We have everything that we need is in us. And what we don't have in us, which we actually do, we have everything, but we'll have the questions that we need to ask to get what we need. It's there. But you can't find it if you're stuck in the toddler conscious mind. You've got to start getting into the parent mind, which can then tap into the non-conscious. And the non-conscious helps us by sending messages through the subconscious. The subconscious slows down. The non-conscious is so fast and so big that your brain would explode, your body would explode, your conscious mind would explode. It's too big. So it has to be filtered. Too big, too fast. The subconscious slows everything down, and it puts the non-conscious finds these most disruptive things. So as that angry person yells at you in that meeting, that memory that is from that cluster of memories, which is a thought from the previous time happening, the non-conscious finds that. It's been telling you to deal with this because now it's in your face. You have to deal with it, puts it into the subconscious, slows it down. The subconscious sends you a signal. The signal is you feel that emotion. Ah, they're doing it again. You feel it in your body, your shoulders tense, your perception. They're doing it again. Your behavior, I'm going to snap at them. So there's four signals that the subconscious will send from the toxic thought that the anger triggered that came from the unconscious, and those are your emotions, your behaviors, your bodily sensations, and your perceptions. Four categories of signals. Notice I said emotions, behaviors, perceptions, and bodily sensations. They're four signals. They're not diseases. Depression would fall under emotions. It's not a disease, it's a signal. All of these give you data. They work together as a team. So now we're transitioning into the third part of how you can learn to help yourself. And that is, I need to learn to listen to these signals. So here I'm in this meeting, the angry thing has happened, this has come up, now it's in my subconscious, and now I am feeling those four emotions, those four things, the frustration, the tension in my shoulders, I want to snap, oh no, they're doing it again. Simple example. So now in that moment, I honor that. I literally can say that as four little, I feel this, I see I'm going to do this. This is what I did in the past. This is my perception of this, my perspective, my attitude at the moment, and this is where I'm feeling it in my body. You can do that in under 10 seconds. You can catch it, you can do that, and then you can reflect, okay, why am I doing this? Well, it's happened in the past. I know because it's attached to the thought, so I can remember the past events. Okay, so what can I do? I can then shift into a little mind shift where I can say, okay, let me reconceptualize this. Let me see, I don't have time to go through all the detail. I can't solve this in this moment. I have to still run this meeting or I have to still respond. But let me distance myself from that person. They are coming with their baggage. That's their perception, whatever, whatever. All those things you need to say. But in addition, I would say, what can I learn from this? Even if I don't have to agree, the fact that it keeps coming up, there's something here that's going on. The fact that they say that, I say this, something's going on. I need to take the time to find out why there's this pattern. Not now, but and then I get from a mind shift, I go into some sort of action, like a deep breathing exercise or something, and I decide to. I give a bunch of different techniques. So it could be if they're angry, you could see them as very small. You could, like in your mind's eye, visualize them shrinking, or visualize them as ants on the stage, or visualize them in a ton. There's hundreds of different techniques in here. You can find what works for you, whatever, whatever. But you use that in that moment. So in 60 seconds, you can gather awareness of how you feel, where it's in your body, how it's shifted your attitude, what it's making you, what your behavior would normally be. You can acknowledge that, you can honor that. You can then do a little bit of a mind shift by saying, okay, well, it could be something I could learn. That's their thoughts, that's their day, they're having a bad day, whatever. So you distance yourself and then get some sort of action to get yourself into a calm state neurophysiologically, deep breathing, sip breathing, and all of that redirects the neuroplasticity. So that network that was there as it happened, which you only consciously were aware of kind of 10 seconds after it all happened, you can now go in and you can change that network. So instead of it going in as more toxic, making it worse the next time you're in the meeting, you actually redirect the neuroplasticity, and you change how you, even as you breathe, that information gets attached to the molecules and you even breathe differently. Because if someone makes you mad and you just go, you're going to be madder because you've taken madness or anger onto the breathing and you've breathed that into your body. It's an energy on a molecule of oxygen, and you take that in your body. So you've got to, you're not going to stop breathing, but you're going to be aware of changing what you attach. So you do a little mind shift. So the breathing even changes. It helps to direct the change in the network. And this is a lot. It takes me longer to explain it than it does to do it. So the first thing is that knowledge aspect. Mind is 99%. Second thing is what I do in the 63 seconds. That regret cycle. If you get stuck in that regret cycle, if only I said this, then this wouldn't have happened. That will destroy you and will not be able you to move forward. And it can keep you so stuck. And destroy is not something that happens immediately. It's over time. And eventually we just, if we don't handle it. But if I get stuck in that regret cycle, for example, I'm going to reinforce it. I'm going to make this even stronger than before. But I can start catching that. Then I can, in that moment of 63 seconds, I can step into step 3, which is, okay, I keep getting angry with this person. I am doing regret cycles 6 times a day, or whatever. I need to spend time. Then you go into the third phase, which is the 63-day habit change. So habits don't change in 21. I've done 40 years of research on this. Habits take at least, that's a myth from a plastic surgeon in the 60s. Lots happen in 21 days. You will face the issue, you'll deconstruct, find the source, the root, reconstruct, reconceptualize. You can never get rid of your story, but you can change what it looks like inside of you. You do all that hard work. And I've developed a formula called the neurocycle that's based on all the science that I use as a therapy technique. It's used as a learning technique. It's used as a formula for, and you can add things onto that. So I explain how to use it in the 63 seconds in here. Then I have an app called the Neurocycle, where it's literally me giving you therapy for 63 days, where you use the Neurocycle, which is a 5-step process daily that you go through for 63 days. It takes about 15 minutes. You can do longer, you can do less, but not more than an hour at a time. That's, otherwise it's too tiring. And that will then, and you can do, if you like whatever meditation technique, whatever CBT affirmation, whatever you like, I teach you in that system where to plug it in. So for example, if you use an affirmation too soon, it won't work. But if you use it when you've gone through the 4 steps and use it at step 5, then it will work. So that's the kind of thing I teach in the Neurocycle app. And I also teach in this book here for cleaning up your mental mess. That's, and then there's actually, because I know you've got a lot of moms, I have one where you can help your kids. So it's teaching the kids how to use the neurocycle. So in a nutshell, whatever's a pattern is a habit. Whatever's a habit is in the non-conscious driving us. The non-conscious is making us aware of it by putting it into the subconscious and giving us signals. Those signals we can start learning to deal with in the 63 seconds. And then I see the patterns and I can work, okay, that's a pattern I need to change. In the first 21 days, you deconstruct, reconstruct. And in the second set of 42 days is where you stabilize that new thought. If you stop at day 21, whatever you've built, the new healthy thought, it's not strong. It's like a little seedling that's been planted. Without watering, it will die. That's what happens. People get frustrated. I did this work and I'm stuck and I'm doing this again and I'm never going to get. You didn't go long enough. There's a healing journey. So I have done all the research showing what happens literally each day of the healing journey. So in a nutshell and in summary, this book helps in the 63 seconds, the Neurocycle app, and this book will help you in the 63 days, give you a pattern. And this is basically a lifestyle of regulating. All of this is mind management and it's self regulation. So it looks like in real life, someone says something, you get really worked up. In the moment, you can catch it and you know that you can do whatever technique. So don't wait until you're in the moment to then, oh, let me dig through the book. Just hold on before I scream at you. Let me go find a technique. Don't do that. Read the book, work out your favorite techniques, find your best. Fine, you only read the chapter on regret cycles because that applies to your people pleasing or something. But get yourself into practicing in the good times how to manage the 63 And then the 63 seconds are so revealing of the patterns in our life that are driving us, because we often don't realize what is driving us. So we need the 63 seconds to find that. Then we need the time to take to work on the patterns. So it's an ongoing lifestyle that we live. And that is basically self regulation. The more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Well, and I think your work is so important. And starting from a very high level, even as a clinician, we were taught it's brain and body. And probably talking about the mind was not even ever discussed during my training.
No.
So I can recall when I first learned about your work, I thought to myself, this makes so much sense, but we're taught completely the antithesis as clinicians. The other thing is how many women in particular get caught in these cycles where they are triggered. They, whether it's maladaptive coping mechanisms that we
Yeah.
just learn as we're getting older. And how I feel like your work in particular, you break the science down in such a way that people can understand it, they can act on it, they can help change their lives significantly. You mentioned people pleasing. How many women listening, including myself, are either reformed or persistent people pleasers?
Yeah.
What does the science tell us about people pleasing? And obviously, using these techniques, we can work through that. We can relearn habits. But what is people pleasing? What exactly is it from a neuroscientific level?
So, yeah, such a great question. And it is definitely, I'm just trying to think now with the exact statistics, the exact numbers. In fact, I might have it written in front of me, but basically, everyone battles with people pleasing, but some people more than others. And the reason why some more than others, and so often women, with women, there's a couple of things happening, and that is and I hate to use the word, but patriarchy has set up certain expectations of how women should perform. And I was actually interviewing someone who about this yesterday, who's written a whole book on this and how it shapes society and shapes. So we have certain patterns that have come through epigenetically, and a lot of that is you're supposed to please everyone as a woman, and you're supposed to please as a child growing up. You're supposed to do there's all these, and there's also men go through too. So it's not just women. There's roles that we have been defined. Men don't cry and all this nonsense, and so those roles have created these patterns so of people pleasing, because people pleasing is I'm supposed to be performative in a certain role, and if I don't do that, then I'm not fulfilling whatever my identity is. And it's like the subtle epigenetic thing that's happened, which, and epigenetics is patterns that pass through the chromosomes, basically through the genes to the next generations. And so it's unresolved stuff. It's patterns and belief systems that have come through culturally for years, and they go through the generations. Now, it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to do those things. If your parents had a lot of depression, battled with depression for whatever reason, because depression is not it's not a disease, it is a response. So maybe they had a lot of trauma that was undealt with, and identity issues, and for whatever their narrative was, those are all just responses. But if it wasn't dealt with, it passes through the chromosomes, and it passes through, and but it's not doesn't mean that you'll have it. It's a proclivity, it's a potential. So you can see, wow, my mom does this or responds in this way. And because you're nurturing whatever you may find yourself responding, how often do we say, oh, my mother did that, now I'm doing it, I don't want to do that kind of thing, as an example. But we don't have to. We can, when we self regulate, we can actually identify those patterns, and we can basically destroy those toxic trees, and we can rewire. We have this ability to direct our neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is quite simply you can change the brain and the body. You can change the network in the mind brain body connection. So it's not just brain and body, it's neuroplasticity in the electromagnetic field as well. So, and we do that with our mind. So knowing that, I think is a huge plus and a huge bonus. In terms of people pleasing, so I'm just saying that just to remind people. So people pleasing is literally like a toxic pattern that has been generated probably first and foremost from societal expectations, and then from each person's unique narrative. Whatever, whether it was good, bad, or ugly, you're growing up. Every parent comes into the parenting style with their own baggage, and their parents were doing their best with what they had, and you do your best and whatever. So we all kind of mess our children up a little bit, and it's a reality. And the big thing is that if we all accept it, it's like you can hold two spaces at once. You can hold the space of, I was a little messed up because my mom was a little messed up, and I have the right to give honor that she did her best, but that did impact me, so I have the right to work on the impact. And so we can always work on both at the same time. We can honor the experience, but also honor ourselves and deal with the impact. It's not an either or situation, it's dealing with both. And it's that kind of thinking that will stop people pleasing. But people pleasing is like, that's those are the patterns. I'm feel too guilty to blame my past or to blame this one, and so I'm just shaming myself, and the only way I'm going to be accepted is if so there's, I mean, that's a broad thing, but everyone's going to react in a unique way. Like what makes you people please will be different to what makes me people please. It could be in a work environment. Being a woman in science, I found myself having to really control um, the people pleasing aspect, because men would like look down on a woman in science. I mean, I've been in the field, I'm 61, I've been in the field 40 years. 40 years ago, they did talk about the mind, by the way. It stopped in the 90s. They would teach mind brain duality and interaction, interestingly enough, but that stopped around the 90s. But men would not really honor women in science. And, it was sort of, well, you whatever, it's a reality, and now it's changed. Definitely, it's much better, but so there was patterns. I would definitely find myself people pleasing men more than women, in terms of in a scientific meeting or in some sort of meeting, whatever area I was working in. I would tolerate more from a male than I would from a
Mhm.
female. And I stopped that as soon as I realized what I was doing. I stopped that. So a lot of men initially didn't, and women reacted negatively to that, because women, that's not what women do. I said, why? You must stand up. We're not talking about male or female. We're talking about a scientific concept. We're talking about I mean, I've had male scientists say things to me like, you're not a scientist. I said, "Well, tell me why not? What research have I done? What have you done? And then how can you challenge me like that? How can you talk to, or how can you talk to, this is the sort of, not many, I must say, a lot of them weren't that rude, but there was, often it was very patronizing. But
Mhm.
and so at first, when I was younger, I would people please. Mother, children, I've got 4 children. I find myself wanting to fix things, so I will people please to keep my kids happy. Not good. It teaches them bad patterns. It's rather to be honest and to deal with a little bit of a crisis from the honesty and that sort of thing. So it comes, each of us need to look at our own things. So, there's the societal stuff down to your unique role and what you do in your life, down to, the narratives of your life, what situations, people in narcissistic relationships, they people please, people in abusive bosses, and have to keep their jobs because they need the money. They compromise. And so what happens with people pleasing is we lose ourselves. And one of the things that I talk about in Help in a Hurry is to track. I've got little charts and things that you can download. There's a QR code, and to just track, if you catch yourself in a people pleasing moment in that 63 seconds, you use one of the little techniques, but is it is to track, going to track over time, like 7 days is often enough to track the pattern of your people pleasing. Who's it with? What type of people? The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how. That's really important. So, a technique in the 63 seconds is to honor, I'm people pleasing. This is not who I am. I'm doing it because of, and do some breathing or visualization. See yourself as powerful, or whatever, an affirmation, a quote, have something like that, but then spend the time, 7 days, fill in the chart and work out what the pattern is, and then do a 63-day. Maybe you need to do multiple cycles, because you might find it comes from a complex source of multiple different things. So you can change that. One of the great ways of that I always recommend, if you're doing a 63-day neurocycle and you've worked out your pattern of people pleasing, is to read fiction as one of your active reaches, which is step 5 of the neurocycle. And when you read fiction, it's a great way of getting to know yourself, because you'll be drawn to characters that feel like they represent things that are in your life or that you're seeing around you, and you get caught up in the story. It stimulates creativity, it taps, and that opens the door to wisdom, and you start finding stuff inside of yourself. My son is an author and writes fiction, and brilliant fiction, and just the conversations, the way, that's how he explores himself, explores life, and etc., etc. And not that you have to be an author to benefit, you just have to read fiction. It's one of the most phenomenal ways of you finding yourself again, because a consistent people pleaser tends to lose their identity. They've compromised so much, and they're running around depending on how much and whatever the pattern looks like. So fiction is it's a quick way of just kind of breaking the ice to get you into a pattern of healing.
That's so interesting. And part of that question was selfishly, I was like curious because I think of myself as a reformed people pleaser. And I think my people pleasing tendencies came out of a bit of chaos growing up. And if I was fairly malleable and didn't create problems, I navigated my home situation. And then ironically, I end up in medicine where in many instances with the patriarchal environment in which medicine is, and certainly was in the 90s and early 2000s, I worked in a very male dominated area of
Yeah.
medicine. And the way that I survived the grumpy physicians that I worked with as a nurse
Gosh.
practitioner was to be very people pleasing. And, I
Hmm.
remember a physician described me as like the most affable, which means most likable nurse practitioner that they had within this group. And at the time, I thought that was so great. And I look back now and I'm like, no, I never want to be
No,
likable. That just means I'm going with the flow. I'm not challenging the status
exactly.
quo. And
Great
so,
example.
yeah. And so for me, when I kind of reflect back on as a younger nurse practitioner, younger woman, what I found interesting was as I was navigating perimenopause and menopause, I started losing that desire to be people pleasing, whether that was a reflection of that loss of estrogen, which is that bonding hormone, that is that hormone that, in many ways makes us very accommodating. And it's not a bad hormone. It's not bad that we as women
No,
have more estrogen than we do other sex hormones. But for me, I noticed that I started to find my voice in my 40s. And certainly now in my early 50s, I reflect back and I'm like, I don't know that person. But I think in many ways, when you brought up reading fiction, I was like, I don't read as much fiction because of my podcast, because I'm always learning for the podcast,
exactly.
interview the experts. And I was like, I read a lot of fiction as a kid. And yet that is such an easy way to reinforce that creative side of our minds and subsequently our brains and our bodies, but mostly for that mind piece. Do you find that women at this stage of life, in your research, are more receptive to addressing maladaptive patterns that they have created throughout their lifetime? I'm thinking from the perspective of, when I'm listening to patients, clients, women that listen to this podcast, making it really relevant. For many people, they're finding themselves again. They feel like they're reconnecting with their minds. It's not their bodies and their brain. It's really their minds, because as you astutely stated,
Mm.
that is 99% of us, and the 1% is the rest. Do you find that this is a time where women will try to reconnect or kind of reassimilate their the way that they view themselves moving about in the world?
Oh, for sure. There's definitely a resurgence of desire to, or a surgence, maybe not a resurgence. There's definitely an awareness, much more than when I practiced for 25 years, and I stopped practicing about 15 years ago. And I found if I look at the trajectory of my career, I worked with all ages. And definitely it was more the kids that they would bring. And they didn't always want to work on themselves. And I'm fine, that's a typical woman statement. I'm fine. Towards the end of my 25 years, it was not like I need some work done. I need help with this too, and I need to work on this. And now it's definitely, if you look at, I mean, just these the podcasts, the podcasts, the openness that there is now to talk about these things through social media. Oh, there's also, I mean, this on the other side, we've got the TikTokification of mental health and self-diagnosis, and I've got a whole chapter on that as well, and the dangers of that. And the awareness that's been created has actually been an awareness that's kind of got people stuck in labels. We don't want that kind of awareness because it makes it worse. But there's conversations happening much more now, and women are really good at say, hey, this is a solution. I need to know more about this. And that's why most women listen to podcasts between 35 and 65. They, buy books, do the work because they instinctively may know that I need to make the change. Before it was more hidden, now it's very open. Women are much more outspoken. Not enough. There's still religious circles where it's terrible. And in all religions, not just one type of religion and certain cultures. But I do think there is a change. I see it, and I see by the questions I get asked, and the kinds of kinds of questions I get asked at a conference when I'm doing book signing. It's different now. People they really want to get in there and solve things, and get their identities and stop the people pleasing.
That must be exciting for you. And you mentioned TikTok and you mentioned labeling. And so social media is both helpful and sometimes in not instances helpful. And I was mentioning to my husband, I must have ticked a box somewhere on social media that now I'm flooded with narcissism, stuff. It's
All the
either
algorithms, yeah.
experts. Why or how can labeling be problematic when we are trying to kind of navigate finding our way along this trajectory of, self-exploration?
Labeling gives us a feeling of comfort. It's a categorization. We want to name things and put them in boxes. We like order. We're not, we are, our psychoneurobiology works, as in the medical world, everything works on order and the whole biochemistry, everything's, and that's how our mind is also, it's organized. Electromagnetics and quantum physics, everything's very organized. So when we have these bodily reactions to our mind, it's very overwhelming. And when we deal with these things that people do and the things that we do, it's overwhelming. So if we don't manage that, then our most automatic thing is, okay, I don't know how people don't know about the mind. They don't know about self-regulation. So they think, okay, I've got to solve it, I've got to slap a label on, because that's what in medicine we've labeled it, we've diagnosed it. It makes so much sense and it gives people a level of comfort. So I always say to people, if you've been diagnosed and you've been told you have bipolar or something like that, don't see it as an it. See it as a description and see it as helpful for a time, but it's a little bit like a gift that's empty. So it's beautiful wrap box and whatever, and you open it up and now what? And so what the research shows is that it's actually made the stigma of mental health worse, the labeling, the diagnosing, this current model, things have got worse. It hasn't improved. The system hasn't worked. Um, the temporary comfort that's provided by giving people a label, because we know there's so much concept creep and there's so much labeling, and it's a way people are trying to make sense. It's really a way of, so we have better conversations about what these things are and what is an extreme form of depression versus the extreme form of the signal of depression versus a normal depression. Because most depression people will get through. They don't need the medication. The medication is not fixing anything. It's a psychoactive drug that just numbs emotions. It doesn't fix, it actually creates more problems. But most people are thinking, oh, I've got a disease, I need that medication because of the conditioning, like the woman conditioning thing, that what females do, what males do. So that we're fighting that system, and that's been very, that's really come through a lot with TikTok and with social media, where people are, identifying also with. We have a desire to be part of a community that's inherent in our nature. So we get us, linked into a community, but it's not the correct information, and it does kind of reduce the those people that, I mean, I have worked with people with autism. For 25 years in my practice, I have seen extreme forms of autism and high functioning autism. I've trained in it, and every second person that's been labeled with autism now, I don't deny that there's something going on, but I don't believe that the label of autism is the solution to label more people with autism or label more people with ADHD as though they are it, because that science has already been disproved. ADHD brains are not different to other people's brains. It's that science has been pulled apart, and even though that's the science that's being quoted in a lot of these, these TikToks, so the wrong science is quoted because it's misread, it's misinterpreted, and we want to simplify and categorize, and that's why these be so drawn to that. The good thing is at least it's opening the conversation, and if we can have more open conversations like this and say, I understand that you feel socially inadequate and you feel you have these symptoms, and yes, you potentially could be high functioning autistic, but let's not get stuck in the label, because what about that person who's really really battling with autism, and they genuinely have a life pattern that's disruptive, and they've been diagnosed and gone through this therapy, and I'm thinking of some of the patients that I worked with, and then someone who I know is really socially, they battle socially, and there's a few little signs that could cross over, but to say that both of those are autistic does disservice to the one who actually really has the problem. I'd rather say to that person, look, let's talk about the behaviors here. Let's talk about the signals. There's four signals. Let's talk about the emotions and the behaviors, and they're very relevant. We validate them. We're not invalidating. You don't need a label. You don't need a disease label to validate what you're going through. What you're going through is very valid. It's your story, and you're reacting to your story. So if we can shift the conversation from validating people through a label to validating people's stories and unique experiences as individuals, we'll then won't use the TikTokification of mental health. We'll shift into more conversations of my life experiences and being a bit more careful. Also, you don't want to share everything with everyone. There's a lot being shared that is helpful, but there's a lot that makes you more vulnerable, and that can make you feel judged. And so it's just a little bit of an imbalance. We've swung to that side, and hopefully it'll swing back again with better conversations.
Well, this is such an invaluable conversation, Dr. Leaf. Please let listeners know how to connect with you outside of this podcast, how to purchase your brand new book or your other books, which I always tell listeners you are one of my very favorite neuroscientists, and I love
Oh,
all the
thank
work
you.
that you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, it's my podcast is the Dr. Leaf Show. You will be on that. I'm actually interviewing you very soon. And all my social media handles, I'm on every platform, all the different platforms, including Blue Sky, LinkedIn, everything is Dr. Caroline Leaf. And my webpage, drleaf.com. My books are available wherever books are sold. This book's on pre-order at the moment. Help in a Hurry. Lots of bonuses, like we always do as authors. We give lots of bonuses. There's some very unique bonuses in this with this book, so they can pre-order at helpinahurrybook.com. And then this book's available wherever books are sold. My Neurocycle app is available, and this one to help your child. I have 19 books, but these are the top 3 that are a great place to start. The Neurocycle app's available on iTunes, Google Play, and we have a web version. And that's the Neurocycle, the formula that is how you manage the 63 seconds and how you rewire habits, how you basically rewire the neurobiological network, how you manage those things that are driving you crazy, basically.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey, if you like this video, you guys are going to love this video, and I'll see you there.
We are trained in our education to really memorize certain aspects of science that get really applicable in treatment of disease, but not so much for prevention. And yet, as we go on, we start to open our eyes to the fact that many of these diseases could be prevented in the first place.